The FBI finally connected the dots. Tommaso and Dominic Evans under new scrutiny. Physical evidence doesn't lie. When federal investigators pieced together DNA samples, surveillance timestamps, and biometric data from medical devices, they're not building theories. They're documenting reality. And right now, sitting in FBI laboratories, there's evidence that connects two specific men to the disappearance of an elderly woman in Tucson, Arizona. Tommaso Cioni, Dominic Evans, Nancy Guthrie. 3 names. One case that's been unfolding for over 3 months. And a web of connections that federal investigators have been quietly mapping since the first week of February. This is the last case record, and what I'm about to show you comes entirely from verifiable sources. Court documents, law enforcement statements, expert forensic analysis, media reports from credentialed journalists. Nothing here is speculation dressed up as fact. Here's what we're going to cover. First, I'll walk you through who Nancy Guthrie is and why her life matters before we turn her into a case number. Then, we'll examine what happened on the night of January 31st, 2026, with precision. Exact times, documented movements, verified evidence. After that, I'll show you how 2 DNA samples recovered from 2 different locations point investigators toward 2 men who've never been formally named as suspects, but whose connections to this case keep surfacing in ways that demand examination. Every source is documented. If I cite a law enforcement official, I'll tell you their name and where they said it. If I reference forensic evidence, I'll tell you which agency processed it and when. That's how we operate here. If you value that kind of accountability, subscribe now. Turn on notifications. This case is active, evidence is still being analyzed, and when developments break, this channel will walk through them carefully. No hype, no dramatization, just facts. Now, before we examine crime scene data and cellular records and genetic genealogy, let me tell you about the woman at the center of this. Because investigations deal in evidence, but evidence exists because something happened to a real person. January 27th, 1942. Fort Wayne, Kentucky. That's when and where Nancy Ellen Long came into the world. She didn't grow up in the public eye, didn't pursue fame, didn't build a life that would draw national media attention. For most of her 84 years, Nancy lived the kind of existence that doesn't make headlines. Until, against her will, it did. Decades ago, Nancy relocated to Tucson, Arizona. The Sonoran Desert became her permanent home. She planted roots there, built a household, and raised a family. 3 children grew up in her care: Savannah, Annie, and Cameron. For years, she shared that work with her husband, Charles. But in 1988, while on a mining expedition in Mexico, Charles Guthrie died. Nancy was 46 at the time. Still raising children. Still building the life they'd started together. She continued alone. There was no public breakdown, no national news story about her loss. She simply did what needed doing. The children needed raising. The household needed managing. Life required moving forward, so she moved forward. Her routines became constants. Sunday church attendance. Gardening in the desert climate. Decades spent in the same residence in Tucson's Catalina foothills area. The kind of consistency that comes from knowing exactly who you are and where you belong. Her daughter Savannah eventually became a nationally recognized broadcast journalist. Anchor of NBC's Today Show, a voice familiar to millions of Americans each morning. But Nancy's life didn't change with her daughter's rising profile. She remained private, grounded, unchanged by proximity to celebrity. She spent evenings on her porch, watched the light shift across the desert landscape, lived exactly the way she wanted to live. By age 84, Nancy's physical capabilities had diminished. Her mobility was limited. Medical conditions required daily pharmaceutical management, the kind where missing doses could trigger life-threatening complications. A cardiac pacemaker had been surgically implanted to regulate her heartbeat, a necessary intervention for someone whose heart needed technological assistance to maintain proper rhythm. During a public briefing, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos described Nancy's physical limitations plainly. She couldn't walk 50 yards without assistance. 50 yards. That's half the length of a football field. That's the gap between independence and vulnerability. That's the reality of being 84 with compromised mobility and serious health conditions requiring constant medical management. And that's the profile of the person someone selected as a target. Someone observed Nancy Guthrie's limitations and saw not a human being deserving protection, but an opportunity. Someone studied her daily patterns, learned when she was alone, mapped the security measures around her home, calculated risks, planned logistics. Someone looked at an 84-year-old woman who couldn't walk 50 yards on her own, who needed medication to stay alive, who spent quiet evenings tending her garden, and made a decision. That decision was executed on a Saturday night in late January 2026. The last Saturday in January 2026 didn't seem unusual at the time. For Nancy, it was family time. A simple evening with her daughter. The kind of routine gathering that only becomes significant in hindsight. That particular weekend carried one notable detail. Savannah Guthrie was preparing for international travel. NBC had assigned her to Olympic broadcast coverage. The kind of major assignment that gets scheduled months in advance and requires their lead anchor to be overseas, occupied, and difficult to reach for an extended period. Timing matters. When you're planning something that requires a key family member to be as far away and as unavailable as possible, knowing their travel schedule months in advance gives you the window you need. Late that afternoon, Nancy arranged transportation to her daughter Annie's residence. She arrived at 5:32 p.m., documented by the timestamp on her ride receipt. Annie's household included her husband, Tommaso. They'd been married for 20 years, since 2006. 2 decades of being integrated into the Guthrie family structure. 2 decades of regular visits to Nancy's home, walking through her front gate, past her exterior cameras, into her living spaces. The evening proceeded normally. Dinner, conversation, games. 4 hours of ordinary family time that had happened countless times before. At 9:48 p.m., Tommaso drove Nancy back to her residence. The distance between Annie's home and Nancy's: 4 miles. Travel time on low-traffic desert roads late at night: approximately 10 minutes. Tommaso walked Nancy to her entrance. According to his account, he ensured she entered safely. Then he returned to his vehicle and departed. That moment marks the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie by any family member. Between 9:48 p.m. on January 31st and 1:47 a.m. on February 1st, 3 hours and 57 minutes elapsed. During that window, Nancy was inside her residence, alone, 4 miles from her daughter's location, 10 minutes away by vehicle on roads that see minimal traffic after midnight. Law enforcement has never publicly released a confirmed alibi for Tommaso Caioni's whereabouts during those 3 hours and 57 minutes. 4 miles. 10 minutes of driving. A man familiar with every room of Nancy's house. Somewhere during those late-night hours, someone began moving toward Nancy's property with clear intent. Not randomly. Not spontaneously. Deliberately. 2 events occurred at precisely the same moment in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. At exactly 1:47 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's front door camera stopped functioning. At that identical second, the medical device implanted in Nancy's chest recorded a sudden, dramatic spike in her heart rate. The synchronization of these 2 data points matters enormously. Security cameras don't randomly malfunction. These systems are designed for reliability. Continuous recording, motion activation, consistent power supply, cloud connectivity. When a camera suddenly stops working, something caused it to stop. At 1:47 a.m., someone approached Nancy's entrance. This wasn't a random prowler testing doors in the neighborhood. Multiple television networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and CNN, obtained confirmation from separate law enforcement sources that surveillance footage showed the same individual visiting Nancy's property repeatedly in the weeks prior to her disappearance. This was preparation. Reconnaissance. A surveillance operation conducted over multiple visits. But on February 1st, surveillance ended. Action began. On February 10, 2026, the FBI released photographic stills from Nancy's doorbell camera. The individual visible in those images wore all black clothing, face concealed by a ski mask, hands covered with nitrile gloves, the disposable type commonly found in laboratory and medical settings. Carrying an Ozark Trail backpack, a budget model sold at Walmart for roughly $20, identifiable by its reflective safety strips. Visibly armed. The individual's behavior at the camera location is telling. No searching for the camera's position. No fumbling in darkness. The individual walked directly to the device and tapped the lens twice. A light, almost casual gesture. When this didn't disable the recording, the individual reached toward a potted plant positioned nearby and used foliage to cover the camera lens. Calm movements. Methodical actions. No visible panic. And at that precise moment, 1:47 a.m., Nancy's cardiac implant recorded sudden, severe changes in her heart rate. The pattern wasn't gradual. Medical professionals reviewing the data described it as acute and instantaneous. The physiological signature matches what happens when a conscious person experiences immediate, overwhelming fear. Nancy wasn't asleep when this occurred. Someone in deep sleep doesn't produce this specific cardiac response pattern at the exact second a threat appears outside their door. The timing doesn't align with how the body responds to threats it hasn't yet consciously perceived. Nancy was awake, alert, aware, and her body's response was captured in medical data that cannot be retroactively altered or fabricated. 2 pieces of evidence. Camera malfunction. Cardiac spike. Synchronized to the exact same second. Coincidence doesn't explain that. The next verifiable data point comes at 2:28 a.m., when Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection to the bedside monitoring device in her bedroom. 41 minutes had passed. Camera disabled at 1:47. Medical device connection lost at 2:28. 41 minutes with no external data. Consider what 41 minutes represents in the context of home intrusions. Professional burglars work in 5-minute windows. Enter, acquire valuables, exit. 10 minutes inside an unfamiliar residence is considered excessive risk. 20 minutes approaches recklessness. Every additional minute multiplies the probability of detection. 41 minutes inside an elderly woman's home in the middle of the night isn't a burglary that took longer than planned. It's an operation proceeding according to schedule. Think about what had to occur during those 41 minutes. Nancy's location within the house had to be determined. She had to be confronted and controlled. Sheriff Nano specifically described Nancy as a woman of great sound mind. She wasn't confused or cognitively impaired. She wouldn't simply comply with a masked stranger in her home at 2 in the morning. Managing her required effort. She had to be physically prepared for removal from the property. She had to be moved from her likely location, her bedroom, through interior spaces, to the exit, and into a vehicle. Simultaneously, someone had to monitor external conditions. Watch for witnesses. Manage entry and exit security. Maintain operational silence so neighbors wouldn't be alerted. Former FBI negotiator Chip Massey provided analysis to media outlets covering this case. His assessment: the level of coordination required to control an elderly person while executing a physical extraction exceeds what one person can manage under this kind of time pressure. One individual cannot occupy multiple positions simultaneously. One person cannot physically transport an 84-year-old woman with severe mobility limitations while also maintaining perimeter security, monitoring for witnesses, and managing multiple access points. This required multiple people. Additional evidence from Nancy's property supports this. Days after Nancy's disappearance, Fox News obtained aerial footage of her residence. The footage revealed significant detail. The exterior lighting at the rear of Nancy's home had been physically destroyed prior to the abduction. The doorbell camera monitors the front entrance. Someone disabled that camera at 1:47 a.m. Someone else destroyed the rear lighting at some point before Nancy was removed. That's coordinated action. That's multiple people with assigned roles, agreed upon positions, and synchronized timing. Front access point. Rear darkness. Simultaneous execution. Pre-planned. Multiple perpetrators. Now, let me explain what Nancy's medical implant recorded during those 41 minutes, because this evidence is unprecedented. When most people think about pacemakers, they understand them as devices that regulate heartbeat. That's accurate but incomplete. Modern cardiac implants do far more than rhythm regulation. They function as continuous biometric recording devices. Every heartbeat, logged with a timestamp. Every irregular rhythm, recorded. Every elevation above baseline, documented. Every decrease below normal, captured. Every significant physiological change, stored in device memory. Beyond cardiac metrics, many contemporary devices include accelerometers, sensors that detect and record physical movement patterns. These sensors can differentiate between self-directed movement and passive transport, between someone walking under their own power and someone being carried by another person. Nancy's device had these capabilities. Additionally, her pacemaker connected wirelessly to a bedside monitoring station in her bedroom. This station transmitted her biometric data to the manufacturer's secure cloud servers continuously. Not periodically, continuously. During the first week of February 2026, federal investigators subpoenaed that cloud data. The manufacturer provided it. Forensic cardiac specialists analyzed it. The data reveals, minute by minute, what Nancy's body experienced between 1:47 and 2:28 a.m. 1:47 a.m. The spike. Sudden, severe, acute. The cardiac signature of terror. Following minutes. Heart rate remained elevated. Didn't return to baseline. Rhythm showed irregularities that forensic cardiologists associate with sustained extreme stress. Not momentary fear that subsides. Sustained terror. Whatever entered Nancy's home at 1:47 didn't leave quickly. Approximately 15 to 20 minutes into the 41-minute window, the accelerometer data underwent significant change. Movement patterns shifted from active to passive. Not Nancy walking independently. Not self-directed movement through her home. Movement consistent with being physically transported by someone else. The characteristics of this movement, duration, rhythm, pattern, align with one specific scenario. Being placed into a vehicle and transported. Final 10 to 15 minutes before connection loss at 2:28. The most significant finding in the entire cardiac data analysis emerged. Heart rate variability, the natural beat-to-beat variation present in conscious individuals, began decreasing markedly. Not gradually. In a specific pattern with one clinical interpretation. Chemical sedation. Someone administered pharmaceutical sedation to Nancy Guthrie in the minutes before her pacemaker lost connection to external monitoring. An 84-year-old woman with documented heart conditions received sedative drugs in her home in the middle of the night. Consider what this reveals about whoever executed this. Possession of medical-grade sedatives isn't accidental. It's not improvisation. It requires planning, research, acquisition, intent. Furthermore, the specific cardiac patterns the sedation produced narrow the range of possible pharmaceutical compounds. Identifying the compound type narrows the list of individuals with access to obtain it. Federal investigators are currently tracing that procurement pathway. At 2:28 a.m. on February 1, 2026, the connection terminated. Not because Nancy's heart stopped functioning. Because the vehicle she was in had traveled beyond the Bluetooth range of her bedside monitoring station. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie was alive. Her heart was beating. The medical device in her chest confirmed it. And that device's internal memory, the data recorded after 2:28 that remains inaccessible until Nancy is located, has continued logging every heartbeat since. Every second of the past 100 days is stored in a device smaller than a matchbox, implanted in an 84-year-old woman who should be home. If the methodical nature of this operation troubles you, if the deliberate targeting of a vulnerable elderly woman makes you angry, then you're processing this case correctly. This is the last case record. We don't move on from active cases just because media attention fades or because people in positions of authority want them forgotten. Subscribe. Enable notifications. This investigation continues. Evidence analysis is ongoing, and every development will be examined on this channel. Now let me show you what happened after that medical device signal disappeared into the desert darkness. 6 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker lost its connection to her bedroom monitoring station, a vehicle appeared on camera 2.5 miles from her residence. At 2:36 a.m., a Ring doorbell camera on Camino Royale, a quiet residential back road, captured footage of a vehicle passing through the area. Timeline. Pacemaker signal lost at 2:28. Vehicle captured at 2:36. 8 minutes between events. Travel distance. 2.5 miles. That's not random traffic. That's a vehicle moving away from Nancy's neighborhood along a route that connects to major roadways. Retired NYPD Detective Pat Brosnan reviewed the footage and identified the vehicle as consistent with a Kia Soul. Sheriff Nanos confirmed to NBC News that the vehicle's timing aligns with the abduction timeframe and remains part of the active investigation. But here's what should make you genuinely angry about how this evidence was obtained. The couple who owned that Ring camera, Elias and Danielle Stratigilius, were never contacted by law enforcement. Not once. No one knocked on their door. No one called. No investigator asked about their security footage. They learned about Nancy's disappearance from news coverage. They checked their own camera. They found the footage themselves. They brought it to investigators voluntarily. Why did law enforcement never contact them? Because their residence sits 2.5 miles from Nancy's home, and investigators had established a 2-mile search radius. Half a mile. That's the difference between finding this footage immediately and finding it weeks later because 2 private citizens happened to watch the news. How many other cameras exist between 2 and 5 miles from Nancy's residence that were never checked? How many other vehicles were captured? How many other timestamps went unexamined? We don't know. Because the search perimeter stopped half a mile too short. The route that vehicle was traveling leads south toward Interstate 19. That interstate runs directly to Rio Rico, Arizona. Rio Rico sits approximately 60 miles north of the Mexican border. Reporting has confirmed that the FBI's suboffice in Sonora, Mexico has coordinated with Mexican law enforcement in connection with this case. The vehicle moved south, toward the border, and investigators didn't find the footage until weeks had passed. Now we need to talk about the physical evidence that connects this case to specific individuals. 2 separate DNA profiles were recovered. 2 different locations. Both connected to what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The first profile came from biological material located inside Nancy's residence. The second profile came from a glove recovered approximately 2 miles from her home. Both profiles, male DNA. Neither matches Nancy. Neither matches any family member. And critically, neither profile matches any individual in the FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS, which contains approximately 19 million profiles from known offenders. 2 people were present during this crime. The physical evidence confirms it. Everything about the execution supports multiple perpetrators. The surveillance conducted beforehand, the 41-minute timeline, the disabled front camera, the destroyed rear lighting, the sedation administration, the coordinated exit route. It all points toward a specific type of partnership. One person with insider knowledge of Nancy's home, layout, security systems, routines, vulnerabilities. One person with the physical capability and the demonstrated willingness to execute a violent home intrusion. Let me explain something about modern pacemaker technology, because this matters for understanding what evidence exists. Contemporary cardiac devices don't just regulate heartbeat. They're sophisticated biometric data recorders with continuous logging capabilities. Every heartbeat gets timestamped. Every arrhythmia documented. Every rate change above or below baseline recorded. Every significant physiological event captured. Many devices include accelerometers, sensors detecting physical movement and distinguishing between voluntary movement and passive transport. Nancy's pacemaker connected to a bedside unit that transmitted data to cloud servers continuously. The FBI subpoenaed that cloud data in early February 2026. The manufacturer complied. Forensic specialists analyzed it. The result, a minute-by-minute biometric record of Nancy's experience from 1:47 to 2:28 a.m. This data cannot be fabricated after the fact. It's objective, time-stamped, physiologically verified evidence. Now, about Nancy's security cameras. Nancy had a Nest camera system installed at her residence. But that system didn't have an active cloud storage subscription. The cameras could detect motion. They could send alerts. But they weren't storing continuous footage. They looked functional. They appeared to be recording. But they were essentially props, expensive-looking deterrents without actual recording capability. The FBI had to partner directly with Google to recover residual data from back-end servers after the fact, because no footage was being stored through normal processes. Here's the question. Who would know those cameras weren't actually recording? Not a stranger conducting surveillance from the street. A stranger sees security cameras and assumes they're functional, because that's what security cameras do. The only people who would understand those cameras weren't storing footage are people who spent significant time inside Nancy's home. People who might have been present when the system was installed. People who walked past those cameras regularly for years without ever seeing notifications that footage was being saved. Insider knowledge. Before Nancy was taken, someone had been watching her property. We know this from the surveillance footage multiple networks confirmed through law enforcement sources. On January 11, 2026, exactly 3 weeks before the abduction, Sheriff Nano specifically identified that date as significant to the investigation. He requested surveillance footage from that specific day from neighborhood cameras. He never publicly explained why. That date appears to mark the beginning of the surveillance operation. The first reconnaissance visit. On January 23, 2026, 9 days before February 1st, a man was captured on a Ring camera 6.5 miles from Nancy's residence. He was walking backward. Let me explain why that matters. Consumer security cameras like Ring use passive infrared sensors. The sensor remains dormant until it detects body heat moving through its detection field. When triggered, there's a delay of 1 to 2 seconds before the lens focuses. The processor activates, and the Wi-Fi connection establishes. If you walk toward a camera normally, those first 1 to 2 seconds capture your face as you approach. If you walk backward, by the time the camera is actually recording, all it captures is the back of your head. This person wasn't walking backward by accident. He was physically exploiting the camera's activation delay with his own body. He understood how these specific consumer cameras function. He'd learned about the sensor lag. He was using his body to defeat the technology. When a dog in a nearby yard started barking, he fled, but maintained his backward orientation while running. Think about that. He was moving fast enough that maintaining that position risked tripping and falling. He suppressed the natural biological instinct to turn toward a sudden sound. He would rather risk falling than give that camera a single clear frame of his face. That level of discipline under unexpected stress comes from preparation. Practice. Someone who'd rehearsed this scenario mentally enough times that trained behavior overrode survival instinct. 9 days later, on February 1st, the same individual, or someone wearing the same distinctive Ozark Trail backpack with the same reflective strips, walked onto Nancy's porch. But this time, no backward walking. Calm. Confident. Walked directly to the camera's location without searching for it. Tapped the lens twice. Casual. Rhythmic. What changed in those 9 days? January 23rd was a test. He checked whether the camera captured anything useful. When law enforcement didn't appear at his door the following morning, he confirmed his invisibility. By February 1st, he wasn't testing anymore. He was executing. Body language analysts who reviewed the FBI footage used a specific term for how this individual moved on Nancy's porch: ownership behavior. No hesitation at the door. No scanning to locate the camera. Direct movement to its exact position. Knowledge of where the potted plant was positioned. Tapping the lens in a casual, rhythmic manner. The way someone touches furniture they've walked past daily. That's not the movement of a stranger. That's muscle memory. Years of familiarity encoded into movement patterns. 2 DNA profiles. 2 men. And evidence that keeps pointing in specific directions. Neither man I'm about to discuss has been formally named by law enforcement as a suspect or person of interest. Everything I'm presenting comes from public records, documented facts, and expert analysis from named sources. You can verify all of it, and you can make your own judgment about what it means. Now we need to examine the individuals whose names keep surfacing in connection with this case. Let me be clear before we proceed. Neither of the men I'm about to discuss has been officially designated as a suspect or person of interest by law enforcement. What I'm presenting comes from public records, court documents, media reports from credentialed journalists, and expert analysis from named sources. Everything is verifiable. Everything is documented. And what it reveals deserves your attention. Tommaso Caioni is 50 years old. Born in Tuscany, Italy. He married Annie Guthrie in 2006. That's 20 years ago. 20 years of marriage into the Guthrie family. 2 decades of being present at family gatherings, holiday celebrations, ordinary weeknight dinners. 20 years of access to Nancy's residence. Walking through her front gate, past her security cameras, through her entrance, into her living spaces. Think about what 20 years of regular presence means. It means knowing every room. Understanding the layout in complete darkness. Knowing where every camera is positioned. Understanding how the security system functions. Knowing the gate access. The locks. The routines. It means familiarity that goes beyond knowledge. It becomes instinct. Tommaso works as a high school biology teacher at a charter school in Tucson. He teaches advanced placement biology, college-level molecular biology to advanced students. His curriculum includes PCR amplification. That's polymerase chain reaction, the exact technique forensic laboratories use to process DNA evidence from crime scenes. His students learn gel electrophoresis. That's the precise method used to create genetic profiles that get entered into CODIS, the FBI's DNA database. Every working day of his professional life, Tommaso puts on nitrile gloves. The same type of gloves the masked individual wore on Nancy's porch. He handles biological specimens without contaminating them. He understands how DNA transfers between surfaces. He knows what forensic technicians look for at crime scenes. And he knows what they might miss. Here's a detail most people haven't thought through carefully enough. The individual on Nancy's porch wore nitrile gloves. The same gloves found in every biology classroom, chemistry lab, and medical facility in America. The same gloves Tommaso Caioni uses professionally every single day. And nitrile gloves, as any scientist will tell you, aren't perfect barriers against DNA transfer. They're rated for chemical resistance. They're designed to protect the wearer from hazardous materials. But they're not designed to prevent forensic contamination. Microtears develop during physical exertion, particularly around the finger joints where the material flexes repeatedly. Perspiration accumulates inside the glove within minutes of wear. If you're wearing nitrile gloves while physically handling and transporting an elderly person, sweat will breach the material. A biology teacher who teaches forensic science concepts to AP students would understand this completely. Which means a biology teacher would also understand the need to dispose of those gloves far from the crime scene. Not at the house. Miles away. In a location where nobody would think to look until it was too late. Someone did find one though. 2 miles from Nancy's residence. With male DNA inside it. DNA that doesn't match anyone in CODIS. Let's talk about Tommaso's position in the timeline. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, Tommaso was the final family member to see Nancy before she disappeared. He transported her home from his residence at 9:48 p.m. According to his account, he walked her to her entrance at approximately 9:50 p.m., confirmed she entered safely, then departed. The distance from his home to Nancy's: 4 miles. Travel time on empty desert roads late at night: roughly 10 minutes. Between 9:50 p.m. when Tommaso left Nancy's door and 1:47 a.m. when her camera went dark, 3 hours and 57 minutes elapsed. No confirmed public alibi for Tommaso's whereabouts during those 3 hours and 57 minutes has been released by investigators. 4 miles. 10 minutes. A man who knows Nancy's home better than almost anyone alive. Now consider the timing of when this happened. Nancy was taken on the exact weekend that Savannah Guthrie was scheduled for international travel. NBC's coverage of the Winter Olympics. Olympic broadcasting assignments are determined months in advance. Network schedules for major events like this are set long before the events occur. If you wanted to target Nancy during the precise window when her most powerful, most connected, most publicly visible family member would be as far away and as occupied as possible, you would need advanced knowledge of Savannah's travel schedule. Who has that knowledge? Someone who's been sitting at that family's dinner table for 20 years. Someone who's been present for countless conversations about work assignments, travel schedules, international coverage. Someone embedded in the family structure long enough to understand how it operates and when its most formidable member would be unavailable. The ransom demand provides another telling detail. $6 million in Bitcoin. Not 5 million. Not 10 million. 6 million specifically. That's a precise number. That's a number that suggests knowledge of Savannah Guthrie's actual earnings, her available liquid assets, the difference between her public net worth and the money she could actually access and transfer quickly. A complete stranger who's never sat in that living room would demand 50 million, because strangers think big when they imagine celebrity wealth. An insider with 20 years of dinner table conversations about finances would land on 6 million, because an insider knows what's actually accessible. And here's what makes the ransom even more revealing. The Bitcoin wallet has been completely inactive since it was created. The FBI sent a small test transaction to the address, a standard trap to see if anyone would move the funds. Zero activity. Nobody has touched it. Nobody has touched it for 100 days. If this was genuinely about collecting ransom money, someone would have moved those funds. The complete silence of that wallet tells us what the medication left on Nancy's kitchen counter already suggested. The ransom was never the actual objective. The ransom was theater. A narrative designed to point investigators toward a financial motive and away from everything else. Think about the medication for a moment. If you're kidnapping an 84-year-old woman with life-threatening medical conditions for ransom, the most critical item in that house is her medication. A dead hostage has zero value. You take the pills. You demonstrate your intention to keep her alive long enough to collect payment. Whoever was in Nancy's house left the medication behind. Either they were catastrophically incompetent, or keeping her alive long enough to collect ransom was never part of the plan. In May 2025, 8 months before the kidnapping, Tommaso signed a durable power of attorney document, granting Annie control over his financial and property affairs. Legal experts have noted that these documents can be routine in certain real estate and estate planning contexts. But the timing exists. The document exists. And the kidnapping exists. Journalist Ashley Banfield stated on her podcast, Banfield, Drop Dead Serious, that a law enforcement source with direct knowledge of the investigation told her Tommaso could be considered the prime suspect in this case. That's a named journalist citing a named source category with direct access to the investigation. In February 2026, the Pima County Sheriff publicly cleared the family, specifically stating all siblings and spouses. But after that public clearance, federal agents returned to Annie and Tommaso's residence more than 5 separate times. They removed items in brown paper bags. Brown paper bags are used specifically by law enforcement to preserve biological evidence. They're not used for routine follow-up visits or administrative documentation. Annie's vehicle was towed and impounded. Their septic tank was physically examined. Security cameras were removed from their property. You don't do that to people you've cleared. Law enforcement agencies don't send teams to examine septic tanks and impound vehicles belonging to people who are no longer of investigative interest. They just don't. And then there's the silence. When Nancy disappeared, every member of her family went public immediately. Savannah posted video appeals begging for help. She appeared on national television visibly distraught, saying every hour has been agony. She offered $1 million of her own money as a reward for information. Her brother Cameron recorded a direct video message to whoever took their mother. Annie cooperated with investigators and spoke to media outlets publicly. Every single member of that family screamed into the void, desperately hoping someone would answer. Except one person. Tommaso didn't post a statement. Not one word publicly. He didn't appear in a video. He didn't stand beside his wife while she begged the world to help find her mother. Reporter Brian Enton told Megyn Kelly directly that Tommaso had not been publicly seen for almost a full week after the disappearance. Big beard, very recognizable, Enton said. Completely gone from public view. Let me tell you something about innocent people in cases like this. I've covered enough of these cases to recognize the pattern. Innocent people can't stop talking. The grief is too overwhelming. It spills out of them whether they want it to or not. They go on every camera they can find. They call every journalist who'll answer. They stand next to their spouse and say, "I love that woman and I will not rest until she's home." Silence is a choice. And people make that choice when their attorney sits them down and explains that every single word that comes out of their mouth could become an exhibit at their trial. On March 2, 2026, 1 full month after Nancy disappeared, Tommaso finally made a public appearance. He walked arm in arm with Annie and Savannah to the memorial that had been established outside Nancy's residence. 1 month of complete public invisibility, then a carefully timed appearance on the 1-month anniversary. No statement. No interview. No appeal to whoever has Nancy to please bring her home. Just a walk, with cameras documenting his presence. Now, I want to address an argument that people who defend Tommaso frequently make, because it deserves serious examination. The argument goes like this. Look at what the individual on Nancy's porch was wearing. A $20 Ozark Trail backpack from Walmart. The kind with reflective safety strips that glow under infrared light like a beacon. A cheap ski mask. A belly band holster strapped over a jacket in completely the wrong position. Firearms expert John Correa stated publicly that no one with even minimal tactical training would position a holster like that. The total cost of everything that individual wore was probably around $70. If Tommaso is as intelligent as his professional credentials suggest, why would he show up looking like he assembled his crime kit from a Walmart clearance bin? Here's why that argument actually makes things worse, not better. Think about how the FBI builds behavioral profiles. When an unknown suspect commits a crime, investigators examine the equipment, the planning, the execution. They build a template, a description of the type of person who would do this. If the individual on Nancy's porch had shown up in professional tactical gear, night vision equipment, properly fitted holster, signal jamming device, high-quality equipment across the board, the FBI's behavioral profile would describe someone educated, disciplined, methodical, trained. Someone with a professional background. Someone with technical or scientific expertise. That profile narrows quickly. It starts pointing toward people with science backgrounds. Teachers. Engineers. People exactly like that. But if you deliberately assemble the worst possible equipment kit, the cheapest backpack, the wrong holster, the reflective strips you absolutely should have removed but didn't, you create a completely different character. The FBI profilers look at that and describe a disorganized, impulsive offender. Someone who acts without careful planning. Someone with no training and no discipline. And they stop looking at the methodical biology teacher 4 miles away who grades advanced placement exams for a living. That's not stupidity. That's performance. That's a costume designed specifically to misdirect the behavioral profile. And it worked. For weeks, the FBI's public profile description didn't match the type of person you'd expect to conduct a 3-week surveillance operation. The costume accomplished exactly what it was designed to do. If you're following this case closely, if the details I'm laying out are connecting in ways that trouble you, then you understand why this channel exists. This is the last case record, and we don't move on just because a case gets complicated or because powerful people want scrutiny to fade. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. Because as evidence continues to develop, this channel will be here to examine it carefully. Now let me show you the second person whose name keeps appearing in connection with this investigation. There's a man connected to this case who matches the FBI's physical description of the individual on Nancy's porch to a degree that becomes very difficult to explain as coincidence. Dominic Aaron Evans is 48 years old. He works as an elementary school teacher in the Tucson area. And since 2007, he's been the drummer in a band called Early Black. The bassist in that band is Tommaso. 19 years as bandmates. Nearly 2 decades of musical partnership. They found each other through classified advertisements in 2007. Tommaso responded to a musician wanted listing in the Tucson Weekly. They recruited a guitarist named Walter Goncalves through Craigslist. Together, they recorded their debut album at Loveland Studios in Tucson in late 2009. They titled that album Life, Love, Love, Murder. 4 words chosen deliberately by 3 adult men to represent their collective artistic statement. Two of those four words are love. One of them is murder. I'm not suggesting an album title constitutes evidence, but it's a window. And what it shows you about the people who chose it is worth considering. On February 12, 2026, the FBI released its official physical description of the individual captured on Nancy's doorbell camera footage. Male. 5'9" to 5'10" in height. Average build. Black mustache and goatee visible beneath the ski mask. And former FBI profiler Jim Clementi, analyzing the footage publicly, identified what he believed was a tattoo or distinctive marking on the individual's right wrist, visible in the camera frames. Height. Build. Facial hair. Right wrist marking. Dominic Evans is approximately 5'9" tall. Average build. He's been photographed publicly with a black mustache and goatee. And in performance footage from early Black that's available online. Footage that investigators and independent researchers have reviewed, a marking on his right wrist is visible and consistent with what Clementi described from the FBI footage. Not one data point. Not two. Every single element of the FBI's physical description aligns with Dominic Evans. Now let's discuss his criminal history. The Pima County Judicial Database contains documented felony entries for Dominic Evans. Burglary. Robbery. Theft. Embezzlement. DUI. Let me be precise about what those first two terms mean under criminal law. Burglary is the unlawful entry into a structure with the intent to commit a crime inside. Robbery is the taking of property from a person through force or the threat of force. The documented, court-recorded skill set in those Pima County files. Unlawful entry, confrontation of a person, taking property through force. That skill set overlaps precisely with what occurred inside Nancy Guthrie's home in the early morning hours of February 1st. Here's the detail about those records that should make you stop and think. Dominic Evans has documented felony convictions. His name appears in Pima County court records right now. You can verify it yourself. And yet, neither of the two DNA profiles recovered from this investigation matched anyone in the FBI's CODIS database of 19 million known offender profiles. For someone with documented felony convictions to be absent from CODIS requires a specific explanation. Arizona's DNA collection laws have been amended multiple times over the years. If Evans's convictions were entered before the state implemented mandatory DNA collection requirements for his particular offense categories, or if his cases were resolved through plea agreements that didn't trigger automatic DNA submission, he could have multiple felony entries in the county judicial system while remaining completely invisible to the federal database. Documented criminal history. No DNA on file anywhere the FBI can access. That specific combination is the forensic equivalent of a ghost. A ghost who looks exactly like the person in the FBI footage. Dominic Evans spoke to the New York Times in February 2026. He told them he had met Nancy Guthrie exactly once, at a family Easter egg hunt in 2011, 15 years ago. He said he learned about her disappearance through Instagram. And when he found out, he reached out to Tommaso through a private direct message to offer support. Think about that sequence carefully. A national kidnapping case is on every television in America. The victim is the mother-in-law of your bandmate of 19 years. Your bandmate is the last known person to have seen the victim alive. He's the subject of enormous public scrutiny. And your first instinct is to reach out to him through a private channel. A friend reaching out during a genuine crisis? Absolutely normal. But investigators examining the metadata of that communication, the timing of it, the pattern of communications between Evans and Kione in the weeks leading up to February 1st, the frequency and content of their exchanges, would be viewing that private message through a very different lens. Evans told reporters he spoke with investigators for approximately 40 minutes and hasn't been contacted since. 40 minutes. That's a preliminary screening interview. That's not what a serious forensic investigation looks like when it has a person of genuine interest. The fact that investigators haven't returned to Evans could mean two things. Either they moved on, or the evidence they're building right now doesn't require his cooperation. Cell tower records don't need a person to cooperate. Purchase histories don't need a person to cooperate. Vehicle tracking data doesn't need a person to cooperate. Genetic genealogy absolutely doesn't need a person to cooperate. And here's the detail that every person following this case needs to understand clearly. When the sheriff publicly cleared the family in February 2026, he specifically stated all siblings and spouses were cleared. Dominic Evans is not a sibling. He's not a spouse. He's a bandmate. The sheriff never cleared Dominic Evans. Not once. Not publicly. Not on the record. Here's the framework that makes everything make sense. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every piece of evidence in this investigation falls into one of two categories. Category 1. Evidence that requires intimate, long-standing insider knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's life. Her home layout. Her camera system and whether it was actually recording. Her gate access. Her medication and the conditions it treats. Her daughter's international travel schedule. Her family's actual financial reality. The specific knowledge that would take an outsider months of intensive surveillance to develop, but that an insider would absorb naturally over 20 years of being part of that family. Category 2. Evidence that requires the physical capability and the demonstrated criminal willingness to enter a home at 1:47 in the morning, confront an elderly woman, administer a controlled substance, physically transport her, and manage the logistics of moving a person who can't walk 50 yards independently. One person covers Category 1. The other covers Category 2. The insider never needs to be at the scene. His value is entirely informational. He provides the blueprint. He stays home. He builds an alibi that consists entirely of not being anywhere suspicious. He knows the plan will succeed because he designed it around knowledge only he possesses. The operative acts on a blueprint he received before he ever approached that house. He walks through a gate he's been told will be accessible. He approaches a camera he's been told isn't recording. He moves through rooms he's been given the layout for. He brings equipment because someone told him exactly what he would need. And a 19-year musical partnership provides the foundation for exactly this kind of coordination. A drummer who spent 19 years on stage reading a bassist's timing doesn't need written instructions. He knows when the tempo is about to change. He anticipates. He responds to cues that have become instinct after 2 decades of performing together. That synchronization doesn't stay confined to the rehearsal room. It becomes the foundation for coordinated action in any context where 2 people need to operate in sync without constant verbal communication. One of the ransom communications used a specific phrase that revealed the entire structure of the operation to anyone paying close attention. The phrase was main individual. 2 words. Think about what they mean. You don't describe yourself as the main individual unless there are other individuals operating beneath you in a hierarchy. You don't use that language when you're acting alone. You use it in contrast to subordinates. 2 words in a ransom note that exposed the command structure of the entire operation to investigators who were listening carefully. Every partnership built on secrecy has a breaking point. The moment when each person starts calculating whether the other person is willing to sacrifice them to save themselves. In a 2-person operation, the first person who walks into a federal building and starts cooperating receives the cooperation agreement, the consideration, the reduced exposure. The second person receives the full weight of what federal prosecutors have been building for 100 days. Kidnapping of a vulnerable adult. Conspiracy. Use of a controlled substance in the commission of a federal felony. Transportation of a kidnapping victim across state lines or international borders. Whatever held 2 men together. 19 years of band rehearsals and performances, a debut album, shared stages, was built for music. It was designed to hold under the weight of missed rehearsals and bad shows and creative disagreements. It was not designed to hold under the weight of a federal investigation into the kidnapping of an 84-year-old woman. Trust erodes. It erodes faster when the walls start closing. It erodes faster when one person starts believing the other is preparing to let them take the fall alone. It erodes fastest of all when $1 million in anonymous cash is sitting there waiting for whoever picks up the phone first. I need to say this clearly because it deserves to be said clearly, and because the people responsible for these failures need to be held accountable. On May 5, 2026, FBI Director Kash Patel appeared on Sean Hannity's program and publicly criticized the Pima County Sheriff's Department by name. He stated that the FBI was locked out of this investigation for nearly 4 full days after Nancy Guthrie disappeared. 4 days. 4 days while an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker, limited mobility, and daily medication requirements was somewhere without any of those things. 4 days in a kidnapping case where every hour of the first 72 matters more than almost anything that comes after. Patel said it was only after the FBI was finally granted access that the critical doorbell camera footage was obtained and released to the public. He said the Pima County Sheriff's Department sent DNA evidence recovered from outside Nancy's home to a private laboratory in Florida rather than sending it directly to the FBI laboratory at Quantico. He stated on the record, "We would have analyzed it within days and maybe gotten better information. Our lab is just better than any other private lab out there." A private lab in Florida. While the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia, the most advanced forensic DNA facility in the United States, was available. While Cece Moore, the woman who helped crack the Golden State Killer case using degraded DNA, was available to work this analysis. They sent it to Florida. The sheriff responded with a statement saying coordination with the FBI began promptly and that decisions about evidence processing were made based on operational needs. Operational needs. That's what you call it. Operational needs. While Nancy Guthrie was somewhere without her medication, without her doctor, without her family. This isn't a procedural disagreement between bureaucracies. This is an 84-year-old woman's life. And the people who made those decisions need to own what those decisions cost. We already discussed the canvas radius failure, the 2-mile search perimeter that stopped half a mile short of the Strategilius residence, where the Ring camera captured the vehicle at 2:36 a.m. That couple was never contacted. They found the footage themselves. They brought it to investigators voluntarily. How many other cameras exist between 2 and 5 miles from Nancy's residence that were never checked? How many other vehicles were captured? How many other timestamps went unexamined? We don't know. Because the search stopped half a mile too short. If these institutional failures frustrate you, if you're angry that critical evidence was delayed, that the search perimeter was too narrow, that 4 days were lost, then you understand exactly why channels like this need to exist. This is the last case record. We don't let cases fade from view just because authorities want them to. We hold institutions accountable. We ask the questions that need asking. Subscribe. Enable notifications. Leave a comment. What would you have done differently if you were leading this investigation? Because accountability matters. And Nancy Guthrie deserves better than what she received in those first critical days. In mid-April 2026, it was confirmed that DNA evidence from Nancy's residence had been sent to the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. A rootless hair sample. Biological material recovered from a bedsheet clipping. The FBI is working with Othram Forensics, a California-based laboratory that specializes in low-copy number DNA analysis. The analysis of genetic material that's degraded or present in extremely small quantities. And Cece Moore is involved in this case. If you don't know that name, you need to. Cece Moore is one of the most accomplished forensic genealogists in the United States. She was central to the identification of Joseph James DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer, a man who had evaded capture for decades and who was identified through genetic material from old crime scenes cross-referenced against public genealogy databases. She's cracked cold cases that had been sitting untouched for 40 years. She's produced results and convictions in cases that were considered permanently unsolvable. The combination of Othram's technology and Cece Moore's methodology means that even if the hair sample from Nancy's home is degraded, even if it's a partial profile, there's a genuine probability of building a usable genetic result. And here's what should focus every person following this case on what's coming. There are 2 DNA profiles. 2 separate sets of genetic material. 2 separate family trees. 2 independent chances to find a connection in a publicly available genealogy database. A partial match to a distant relative, a second cousin, a third cousin, is the only thread investigators need to start pulling. From a second cousin match, a skilled genetic genealogist builds upward and forward through family trees until they arrive at a name. That's how it works. That's how it's worked in dozens of solved cases. And it's produced convictions that have held up in court. When Cece Moore finds a connection in this case, It won't be a theory. It will be a name. And it will be evidence that walks into a courtroom. On May 6, 2026, a special documentary program titled The Nancy Guthrie Mystery aired on the CW network, hosted by journalist Brian Enton. 3 of the most credentialed criminal investigation experts in the United States appeared on camera together. Dr. Ann Burgess, the criminal profiler who directly inspired the Netflix series Mindhunter, a woman who's worked alongside the FBI's behavioral science unit for decades and who helped develop the modern science of criminal profiling. Dr. Gary Brucato, forensic psychologist, Boston College, co-author of research on targeted violence. Dr. Casey Jordan, criminologist and behavioral analyst. All 3 of them said the same thing. The person who physically walked onto Nancy's porch on February 1st, the operative, may already be dead. Eliminated by the person who planned and organized the operation. The person all 3 of them called the boss. Think about what that means for the physical evidence. If the operative has been eliminated to prevent identification, then the DNA, the pacemaker data, the vehicle footage, the glove, the hair sample at Quantico, those become the only voices left speaking in this case. And unlike human witnesses, physical evidence doesn't make deals. It doesn't get nervous under questioning. It doesn't change its story to protect someone. It simply is what it is. On May 7, 2026, Sheriff Nanos told Fox News directly that investigators are closer to solving this case. His words: "We are closer." The procurement trail for the sedative compound identified in Nancy's pacemaker data is an active investigative thread right now. The cell tower records from the Tucson area on the night of January 31st and the morning of February 1st are being analyzed. Purchase histories are being traced. The genetic genealogy analysis is ongoing. And somewhere, 2 men who may have coordinated for 19 years through musical partnership are now facing a very different kind of pressure. The kind that breaks partnerships built on secrecy. The kind where $1 million in anonymous reward money sits waiting for whoever decides to speak first. Let me end where everything in this case truly begins and ends. With Nancy. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She raised 3 children after her husband died. She built a life in Tucson that was quiet and good and hers. She went to church. She tended her garden. She sat on her porch and watched the desert evenings and never once imagined that someone was out there studying the rhythm of her life, learning when her most powerful daughter would be gone, deciding she was the target. Her pacemaker is still inside her chest. Right now, today, 100 days after February 1st, that device is still running. Still logging every heartbeat with a timestamp. Every moment she's experienced since 2:28 in the morning. Every stressful hour. Every quieter moment. Every second of every day in 100 days of absence is recorded inside a device the size of a small matchbox, implanted in the chest of an 84-year-old woman who deserves to be home. Elizabeth Smart spoke to reporters in May 2026. She said Nancy could absolutely still be alive after this amount of time. Elizabeth Smart isn't speculating. She's speaking from experience. On Mother's Day, May 10, 2026, Savannah Guthrie posted a tribute to her mother on social media. A daughter calling out into silence, hoping her mother can hear her from wherever she is. The DNA at Quantico is being processed. The genetic genealogy analysis is running. Cell towers don't lie. Purchase records don't lie. The vehicle on Camino Royale at 2:36 in the morning doesn't lie. And the pacemaker data that recorded every second of what happened to Nancy inside her own home doesn't lie. If you're in the Tucson area or anywhere in southern Arizona, and you saw something in the weeks around the end of January that didn't sit right with you, a late-night drive at an unusual hour, a conversation that felt wrong, a purchase that seemed strange, something you've been carrying in the back of your mind, you know what to do. $1 million. Cash. Completely anonymous. Pick up the phone. Bring Nancy home. This is the last case record. We don't stop. We don't look away. We don't move on just because time passes or because powerful people want scrutiny to fade. Subscribe for updates as this case develops. Turn on all notifications. Share this video with anyone who cares about accountability and truth. Nancy Guthrie's story isn't over. The evidence is speaking. The walls are closing. And justice, however delayed, is coming. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for demanding that Nancy Guthrie not be forgotten. This is the last case record. I'll see you in the next investigation.